Hey, I'm Sooper. Welcome to the Monkey Farm. This video is going to discuss topics of abuse, assault, and rape, and other stuff that really isn't fun or pleasant. So if those are topics that bother you, I encourage you to watch a different video instead of this. If you are in a situation where you are being abused, please get help. This is a situation that's very close to me because I was previously in an emotionally and physically abusive relationship, and I needed help to get out. And there's no shame in that. And there's nothing that you've done that's wrong. I also have helped another friend who had to leave a similar situation, and I would do it again if needed without hesitation. So do not be ashamed to ask for help. It's out there, and you deserve better. Now on with the show. So did you know that everything right now is being canceled? Cancel culture has gone too far, and soon you won't be able to enjoy anything anymore because SJWs are going to ruin all of entertainment because they hate free speech. Nothing is safe. They've canceled Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss. Pepe Le Pew is next, and if we don't stop it, they're going to cancel the Addams Family for being altogether ooky. Where does it stop? That entire statement, of course, was completely wrong. In regard to pop culture characters or intellectual properties being changed, those are actions of companies who have every right to change and update their own stuff. And mostly the changes only matter to fringe groups who are suddenly very invested in a potato's genitalia for some reason. Like, are y'all okay? Is everything okay? I'm worried for you, seriously. Also, most of the people out there getting big mad that 6 Dr. Seuss books aren't being printed anymore probably couldn't name those 6 without looking it up and haven't even heard of half of them. But they're important to my childhood or whatever. If they're that important, you probably already have a copy at home, right? So they're not erasing that copy. They're not burning them or anything. They're not busting into your house to take them away. They're just choosing not to print more of books that, by the way, have not been selling well for years anyway. And all of that has been done with the involvement of Dr. Seuss's family, who are very aware that Seuss himself felt that these early works of his were racist or insensitive. And he tried with later works to be more inclusive and kind. And I figure his family probably knows better than you or I what he would have wanted in the first place. Now, there are several subsections of what people mean when they say cancel culture, and most of it is disingenuous nonsense. What I mostly want to focus on, though, is less about whether a potato has a penis or vulva, and more about how we deal with real-life people who do or say terrible things. So, straight up, most examples of cancel culture that keep being brought up right now are a way of being dismissive when a famous person that they like is accused of or caught doing something terrible. A more accurate label for what this would be facing adult consequences for your words and or actions. I planned on doing a video on this topic back in October of last year, but I kind of wanted to keep things light at the time. And I know it's a hot button issue for a lot of people, and I just didn't have the energy to wade through all this. But literally every time since then, for several months that I've tried to write another video or something else, this comes back staring me in the face with a brand new news story.
Well, guess what? Now this is happening.
Here are a few examples just recently of celebrities who have been facing increased scrutiny or been fired from their former jobs for their words or actions. There was a bro country singer named Morgan Wallen who got dropped from his label after casually using the N-word on video and being caught doing it. Marilyn Manson had been accused by a growing number of women of violent sexual assault, which resulted in him being dropped from music projects and a TV series he'd filmed a part in already. The Mandalorian actress Gina Carano, who has since last year posted a fair amount of COVID denial, transphobia, mocking people for wearing masks to help lower the spread of COVID, and most recently compared having an unpopular opinion to Jewish people being literally murdered during the Holocaust, and has now been fired from future Disney projects. And late 90s and early 2000s nerd icon Joss Whedon. He took a hit a few years back when it came out via his ex-wife that he was allegedly using his time on the shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, and Firefly as his own personal casting couch. Not much came of the consequences of that, though, at the time. But then accusations started up again in the past year from his time doing reshoots on the Justice League movie and abusive racist behavior towards cyborg actor Ray Fisher. And then former Buffy and Angel actress Charisma Carpenter spoke out about abuse that she had suffered from him on the set of those shows, and several of her co-stars from Buffy and Angel almost all backed her up, as well as staff from those shows and the Justice League movie, confirming that there have been several incidences of Joss Whedon being an abusive dickwad for no reason, including expressing glee toward other writers at making women on his writing staff cry during meetings. He just thought it was hilarious to make women cry that worked for him. He's a great guy. I suspect that things took a while on this last one because some people just didn't want to believe that Whedon was like this. He'd been a darling of geek culture for a long time. With several beloved series, he'd won awards for his supposed strong pro-feminist writing. Some people are still defending him right now with phrases like, he probably meant it differently than she's portraying, or, well, there's three sides to every story. And the thing about that phrase is, yeah, sometimes that's true. But in a case where one person has a series of personal stories indicating abuse happened, and the other person's story is never happened, and then several other people speak up and say, yeah, that happened exactly like she said, and also he did this other terrible thing, and this, and this. There are in fact not really three sides to this story. There are incidences that happened, and if they happened that way, there's not really a context under which that would be appropriate behavior. One of the stories involved a incident where there was a rule on late seasons of Buffy where he was not allowed to be alone in a room with one of the female actresses who was still a minor at the time. They didn't say why, but that's pretty sketchy on its own. And yeah, it's possible that all of these people could be lying, but that kind of situation is most certainly the exception. And the more people come forward with the same stories about the same guy, the smaller and smaller the chance is that it's not true. So yes, could be a lie, but it's so unlikely. Absent any credible and compelling reason to think that all of these people who have been accusing him might be lying, I believe them. End of sentence. And I know when accusations about rape or sexual assault come up, there's always some asshole who is like, this is why cancel culture is so terrible and needs to stop. One false accusation can ruin a man's entire life. So here's the thing about that. First, false accusations of rape are, as I said before, a minuscule amount of total rape cases. It's like 1% of 1%. It's very unlikely. I know some of you are saying, well, I know a guy who definitely was falsely accused, and that's awful, and nobody's saying it never happens. But if every time you hear about an allegation of rape, your first reaction is, well, they might be lying, I think you might want to examine why your first thought is of the least likely possible scenario. And it's about the only crime where people seem to be predisposed to immediately think a crime didn't happen. If somebody's TV gets stolen, nobody says that they think we should consider whether a robbery really occurred or not. Nobody looks at a dead body with 8 knives sticking out of it and says, it was probably an accident. The second thing about this is historically we've seen that one accusation doesn't destroy anything. 3 of the last 5 presidents of the United States have had at least one allegation of rape, and so far none of them have had their lives ruined by it. If I went into every celebrity who's been accused of rape and continued to have a career for years or decades afterwards, most of them without ever serving a day in jail, this video would be at least 9 hours long. Even non-celebrities are rarely convicted of rape, and even fewer serve jail time. And for a wealthy celebrity, you have to screw up so badly that you have like a dozen accusations before you face any real consequences. That sad fact is slowly changing, but we still have a long way to go. Meanwhile, we also have a demonstrable history of the accusers in these cases facing consequences for daring to speak out. A lot of the time, they don't speak out specifically because they're afraid they won't be believed, and it'll ruin their lives while their attacker will just continue on as if nothing happened. And it's easy to see why that's a fear, because it's very grounded in reality. Charisma Carpenter didn't speak out for over 15 years about the things that happened to her. And it's pretty clear that part of that is because she was afraid of how it would affect her career and not his. There's also a lot to be learned from how the various people respond to these scandals. A few years back, when James Gunn was removed from future Marvel movies over some old Twitter jokes, which indeed were in bad taste and terrible and also not funny, he put out a statement apologizing for the jokes, removed the tweets, explained that years back he thought being edgy was the same as being funny, and he now tries to do better and be better with that. And he accepted responsibility for his actions instead of trying to deflect blame or pretend it didn't happen, and acknowledged that there were consequences like an adult. Contrast that with Marilyn Manson, who just says he did nothing wrong and all the stuff he put various women through was totally consensual. Joss Whedon first said that he did nothing wrong and his ex-wife's entire story was a lie, and how could she put their children through this? And now has pivoted to just not commenting as more and more stories have popped up. And Gina Carano, who is now going around saying that Disney firing her was bullying, but her making fun of trans people is totally fine. Gunn eventually got rehired by Disney, probably due in part to his more adult and mature reaction to things and his sincere apology. I don't know that some of these other guys are going to get as good results with, if you think about it, I'm the real victim here. And part of the problem is that we put these entertainers on a pedestal in finely sculpted marble. And if you put that pedestal too high, you can't see the flaws in the sculpture anymore. And you become afraid to climb up and look closer because you've put the pedestal so high that it might fall over when you're climbing up to examine it. So you just don't bother because you're too invested. And you start off with, these accusations might not even be true. Let's wait for the full story. But then as things get examined and it becomes clear that more often than not it's real, you pivot to, hey, you got to separate the art from the artist. Or worse yet, well, that's what it takes to make good art. So I'm just going to say here, no, I don't, and no, it doesn't. We do not need to allow abuse because it makes good art. Nope, not at all. No. I'm pretty sure most artists in a collaborative media would say they'd much rather not be abused, and that being happy with the work environment makes their performance better and not worse. Oh, and before I stray too far from it, incidents where someone like Wallen or Carano get fired for saying aberrant things is not a violation of the First Amendment. The First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States prohibits the federal government from taking away your right to free speech. Hold on, I need a drink. The same rules do not apply to a private company deciding that an entertainer is making their brands look bad. Those people almost certainly have a clause in their contracts that covers this, because it's pretty standard to have that in a contract. In the entertainment industry, they knew they were crossing a line and they did it anyway. In Carano's case, she was warned repeatedly and had several people explain to her why it was a problem, and she just continued on. With Morgan Wallen, everyone knows that the N-word is not a thing for him to be saying in any context. He shouldn't say it. Actions have consequences, and a private company does not owe them, you, or me a right to a platform. The things they've said are indefensible, full stop. Also, and this is going to get more political, don't care, not sorry, the outcry against cancel culture is mostly led by far-right conservatives, and it's funny because they've been trying to cancel things they don't like and people who say things they don't like for literally decades. They wanted to cancel the Dixie Chicks for saying a mean thing about the president. They wanted to cancel Sinead O'Connor for criticizing the Pope and the Catholic Church. They wanted to cancel Madonna for being too sexual. In the early 2000s, they tried to change the name of French fries to Freedom Fries because they were mad at France. and tried to cancel Heinz ketchup because it was partially owned by the wife of John Kerry, who was the Democratic nominee for president that year. I desperately wish that all of that about the fries and the ketchup was a joke, but no, around 2004, I had to eat this terrible, watery alternative to Heinz at home that was labeled W Ketchup, named after George W. Bush, because my parents refused to buy Heinz for a while. I grew up with conservatives constantly trying to cancel Dungeons and Dragons and any other role-playing game because it was a gateway to the occult. I have since then, as an adult, played Dungeons & Dragons, Hero System, White Wolf tabletop and live action games, Star Wars D20, and a variety of other fantasy role-playing games. And not only am I not involved in the occult, I haven't learned a single fireball spell in real life. And it's a letdown, to be honest. They lied to me. We had a book in my house when I was growing up called Turmoil in the Toy Box, which was essentially an attempt to cancel all of 80s children's cartoons because they were, as with D&D, a secret gateway to the occult and satanic worship, or would convince you to kill yourself. This is, again, not a joke. They had an anecdote in this book that is burned into my brain because I read it when I was like 10 years old, and it detailed how a child hung themselves trying to imitate an episode of Scooby-Doo. In retrospect, I'm pretty sure that that story was completely made up and being used to make their point. Lying isn't very Christian of you, Phil. And of course, over the years, they've tried to cancel pretty much any music that was too loud, too sexual, too political, or just had too many swears. I'm starting to think they just don't want us to have any fun. They even tried to cancel the Beatles back in the 1960s because John Lennon said they were more popular than Jesus. And there's a lot to unpack in that situation. But first, it didn't work. The Beatles are still making money right now, 50 years after they broke up. There are Lego sets out that you can buy that have their faces on them right now. I can go to Target and buy a Lego set that just exists for me to create a mosaic picture of George Harrison, which, honestly, that's pretty cool. George Harrison was pretty awesome. Anyway, but it was also a complete misrepresentation of what he was saying in the first place. And conservatives framed it as Lennon bragging about how cool he is. I'm bigger than Jesus, na 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 na. Actually, what he was saying in context was there are people worshiping us as if we are gods, and that's messed up. And he's right. I think if you are someone who is being worshipped as if you're a god, and you don't see something a little troubling about that, there may be something wrong with you. I don't know. You'd think religious people would have been all in on agreeing with his statement and just rolling with that and being like, yeah, this is terrible, and doing something about it. But instead, they turned it into a rallying cry to burn records and protest Lenin for heresy. And the entire controversy was willfully dishonest. Also, several of these examples are things where they indeed organized burnings of books, records, CDs, etc. Meanwhile, nobody's burning copies of Green Eggs and Ham, which they shouldn't because that book's awesome, or their DVD boxed sets of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But the right is definitely claiming that it's evil leftists who are out burning books as part of cancel culture, even though that specific action of burning documents and art and other things has historically been a tactic of far-right regimes. This is what's called projection, where you behave badly in a certain way, so you project that same bad behavior onto those who oppose you and assume that is how they will act because that's the way you would act. It's sort of like when a specific political movement spends decades trying to rig elections, and then when they lose an election, they say it must be because their opponents rigged the election, just as a hypothetical example. Anyway, back to the main topic. In cases of abuse, sexual assault, coercive rape, these are absolutely not situations I can just shrug off and say, well, you got to separate the art from the artist, man. Now, I am not saying you, the viewer, has to do what I do. Everyone has to make their own decisions as to where that line is for them. And for me, part of why the line is where it is this. If a famous actor or musician raped one of your best friends, I'm guessing you probably wouldn't continue to see that guy's films or listen to his albums. You certainly wouldn't invite your friend to come enjoy that guy's work with you. Like you wouldn't go, hey, do you want to come and watch a movie featuring this guy who raped you? You wouldn't do that. And you most definitely wouldn't say to your friend, yeah, I know he's a monster and he hurt you personally, but like this movie / song is just like really good. You would never in a million years say that to a friend of yours. You would not be able to look them in the eye and do that. So then my question becomes, why does it matter whether you personally know the victim or not? Why would it only matter if it affects you personally or you have to defend it face to face with one of the victims? I love movies. I am absolutely a giant movie nerd, in case you couldn't tell by the everything about me. But there is not a single movie in existence that I will ever value above the safety, well-being, and bodily autonomy of an actual human being. None. And that sounds easy to say, you know? But I want you to understand that that's something that I've struggled with, and I've had to do a lot of self-reflection on. There are movies and shows by several people we now know are garbage that I've loved over the years. Movies I own copies of. Previous to all of the news that had come out, I probably watched and rewatched Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel more than any other TV series. The Usual Suspects, Seven, House of Cards were all things made far better by Kevin Spacey's performances. LA Confidential, I've many times said, his performance is the thing that is the best thing in that entire movie. But he's sexually assaulted several men over the years and has admitted that that's happened. And I can't look at him now without thinking about it. I cannot turn my brain off to that. And maybe you can, but that's why I'm saying we all have a line. And we have to choose where that line is. I have an entire cosplay outfit that I've worn to multiple Comic-Cons that is a Hufflepunk aesthetic. It's essentially Hufflepuff colors, but as like a punk outfit. I'm over-explaining, whatever. I spent a lot of time and effort in creating that, and I've been very proud of it. I've had a lot of fun. I've gotten compliments on it at conventions, and it's just been a blast. But I don't currently feel comfortable wearing something that promotes a platform for an author who actively causes harm to trans people for the act of existing. So one of my favorite horror movies is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven is one of my favorite horror directors. I have a hoodie with custom art on the back of the Freddy Krueger nursery rhyme that is then just like also modified and covered in patches of other movies and punk bands and horror stuff. But Johnny Depp is absolutely a violently abusive person. And there are several documented incidences of it going back to the 90s at least. There are people who want to say that it's like, oh, this is just a thing about him and his ex-wife and that's it. But there are a lot of instances of him having violent outbursts at people. There are multiple lawsuits that he's had over the years since the 90s and multiple documented incidences of him violently lashing out at people. But for some reason, a lot of fans protect him like he's some frightened child who has never done anything wrong in his life and needs protecting, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And all of that is not even getting into his very vocal support for child rapist Roman Polanski, who is someone who also should have been canceled a very long time ago, but instead he, just continues to make movies and live as a free man in France and win Oscars because people protect him. And that kind of shit needs to stop. It all just doesn't sit well with me. But I love that movie, and I've enjoyed several other movies he's starred in. So I sit here and wonder, does endorsing that movie endorse him? And does wearing the hoodie endorse him? Or does it not, since his character and he are not referenced on the hoodie at all, and this first movie was long before he became a horribly abusive person? Is it sort of okay because he's a secondary character? Or is that my brain trying to rationalize it because I don't want to let go of a movie? Have I put it on such a high pedestal that I can't see the cracks in the sculpture? Or am I willfully ignoring the cracks because I love the movie so much? And I don't really have a definitive answer for that. For me, right now, I can't sit and watch the movie or anything else that he's in. But I can't make that decision for you. That isn't cancellation. It's a personal choice. And it sucks to have something you love get tainted like that. I really get it. It's a struggle. And it's not wrong for you to make a completely different choice from mine. But it's also not wrong for a company to cut ties with someone who's making public statements to hurt their businesses. It's definitely not wrong for them to fire someone who is committing crimes at work. Coercing people at work into sexual acts or harassing them until they cry, as Joss Whedon is alleged to have done, are crimes. It's both unethical and illegal. And it's not wrong for a film or TV studio to say, I don't think we want to hire this guy to make stuff for us anymore, because we could then be complicit in doing a sex crime. So none of that is wrong. You choosing to watch a thing or not watch a thing is not wrong. It is a bit iffy to pretend the dilemma of all this doesn't exist because it makes you uncomfortable to have to think about it. Also, if I am wrong and we are canceling everything, I nominate student debt, housing foreclosures, for-profit healthcare, privatized prisons, the entire concept of credit scores, and daylight savings time to go next. I have a longer list, but those are a good start. Thanks for coming to my meltdown. This video is done. I'm hoping to get back to a regular schedule going forward. If you want me to talk more into a camera like I'm staring at you, like and subscribe to my channel, or comment below if you're mad at me for saying bad things about a celebrity you like.